At her party, my daughter looked me in the eye and said, "You're not welcome. You embarrass me." I stayed calm, smiled, and passed a folder to my lawyer. "It's time," I said quietly. Her grin vanished. It was at her own engagement party, surrounded by the elite she desperately wanted to impress, that my daughter Emma looked me dead in the eye and uttered words that would forever echo in my memory. "You're embarrassing me in front of my real family." What she didn't know in that moment of blinding arrogance was that with those venomous words, she was about to publicly destroy a $33 million inheritance, and I, her embarrassing construction worker father, was about to watch her entire carefully constructed new life crumble around her. You see, Emma thought she understood money, power, and status. She was convinced she'd finally arrived. But she was about to learn a brutal lesson about the difference between inherited wealth and earned respect. This story, the true story, actually began 25 years ago with a decision I made that changed everything. And it's the story of how a $33 million inheritance vanished in a mere 72 hours. My name is Jake Williams. For the past 5 years, my daughter Emma had been treating me like a second-class citizen within my own family. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, but it steadily escalated. I remember her wedding 3 years ago, a day that should have been joyful. Instead of seating me at the family table, she placed me with the catering staff. When I, confused and a little hurt, asked her why, she just shrugged, avoiding my gaze, and said, "Dad, you'll just be more comfortable with people who understand your situation." My situation? I'm a construction foreman. I drive a 2018 Ford F-150. Yeah, it's got 200,000 miles on it, but it's still a reliable truck. I wear steel-toed Red Wing boots that cost me a good $350. Not cheap by any means. But Emma, she never bothered to notice the price tag or the quality. To her, I was just the guy who showed up to family events with dirt under his fingernails. And that, apparently, was unacceptable. The pattern, the dismissiveness, only grew worse after she married Bradley Sterling last year. Bradley comes from old Beverly Hills money, the kind of family that owns a chain of luxury hotels. At Christmas dinner, can you believe it? Emma actually apologized to Bradley's parents for my rough hands when I passed the wine bottle. She said, and I quote, "Dad spent his whole life working with concrete." It shows. A stab to the heart, that was. What Emma didn't know, what I didn't even fully know until much later, was about her mother, Rebecca. Rebecca had passed away 6 years ago, leaving behind what I believed was a modest life insurance policy. Turns out Rebecca had secret family money. Old money. The kind that comes with layers of lawyers, complex trust funds, and very, very specific rules. When Emma turned 28 last year, she inherited it all. A staggering $33 million. That included $28 million in a trust fund, plus an immediate $5 million in cash. Overnight, my daughter went from comfortably middle class to a multimillionaire. And that's when things really took a turn for the worse. That's when she bought the $2.8 million Beverly Hills penthouse. That's when she started shopping at stores where a single dress cost more than most people's cars. And that's when she decided her hard-working construction worker father was nothing more than a liability to her shiny new image. But here's the kicker. This inheritance, this immense fortune, came with some serious requirements. Emma was legally obligated to donate $500,000 annually to charity. She also had to maintain what the legal documents vaguely, yet powerfully, termed respectful relationships with surviving family members. And she had to submit annual reports proving both conditions were met. Emma, of course, focused solely on the money. She completely ignored the fine print. Just last month, she joined the exclusive Beverly Hills Country Club. The membership fee alone was $50,000 annually. She told me she wanted to network with her kind of people. Her words, not mine. That's where she met the Ashworth family, Richard Ashworth, who owned a private equity firm worth an estimated $800 million, his wife Caroline, who chaired 3 different charity boards, and their son Marcus, a Harvard Business School graduate. Emma was desperate to impress them. And apparently, having a father who showed up in work clothes simply wasn't part of that plan. The absolute breaking point came 2 weeks before the engagement party. Emma invited me to lunch at that same country club. I actually held a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could finally talk, repair our relationship. Instead, she slid a business card across the table. It was for an image consultant. "Dad," she said, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond my shoulder, "I need you to understand something. My life has changed. The people I associate with now, they have certain expectations." I picked up the card. Sarah Mitchell, image consultant to Beverly Hills Elite. $500 per session. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Emma?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm asking you to get some help," she replied, still not meeting my gaze. "Learn how to dress appropriately. Maybe take a class on social etiquette. You could even say you're retired instead of what you actually do." I slowly handed the card back, my pride stinging. "I'm proud of what I do." "Well, I'm not," she shot back without a moment's hesitation. Her words were like a physical blow. "I've worked too hard to build this new life to have it undermined by someone who doesn't understand the rules." "The rules?" As if respect, as if family was something you could just buy at Nordstrom. I should have walked away right then. My gut screamed at me to just leave, but I couldn't. I made one last desperate attempt. Emma, I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. I've been your father for 29 years. Doesn't that count for something? She looked around the opulent country club dining room, making sure no one was listening, then leaned forward and whispered, Not anymore, Dad. Not in my world. That conversation happened on September 1st, exactly 13 days before her engagement party. The party where everything changed. Let me tell you what I stood to lose if I stayed silent. First, my relationship with my only child. Emma and I weren't close anymore, not like we used to be, but she was still my daughter. I'd raised her alone after Rebecca died, taught her to ride a bike, helped with homework every single night for 12 years, walked her down the aisle at her wedding. All of that history, all of those memories, were about to be erased simply because I didn't fit her shiny new lifestyle. Second, my reputation. Word travels fast in Beverly Hills. If Emma continued telling people I was an embarrassment, it would affect more than just family dinners. It would affect my work relationships, my friendships, my standing in our community. But the biggest loss, the one that truly haunted me, would be my self-respect. I'd spent 25 years building something I was incredibly proud of. I wasn't about to let anyone, not even my own daughter, tear that down without consequences. Here's the crucial part, the secret Emma knew absolutely nothing about regarding her inheritance. The money came from Rebecca's grandmother, Elizabeth Morrison. Elizabeth was old Philadelphia money, the kind of family that built their fortune in the 1800s and never forgot their values. Elizabeth herself lived through the Great Depression. She understood, truly understood, the profound difference between simple money and genuine character. When Elizabeth drafted her will in 2010, she included very specific, very ironclad language about family loyalty. Section 7, Clause 2 of the inheritance documents explicitly stated that beneficiaries must maintain respectful and supportive relationships with all surviving family members to retain access to funds. Section 12, Clause 4 was even more pointed, more ominous. Any public disrespect, humiliation, or rejection of family members will result in immediate review and potential revocation of benefits. Margaret Davis, Rebecca's sharp family attorney, had meticulously explained these conditions to Emma when she inherited. Margaret made absolutely sure Emma understood that the money wasn't just a gift. It was a profound responsibility. Emma signed the documents. She agreed to the terms. And then it seems she promptly forgot every single one of them. What Emma also didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything. Every subtle insult, every public humiliation, every single moment she chose her new social status over basic human decency. I had text messages where she told her friends I was just a construction worker who didn't understand sophisticated people. I had photos from events where she literally introduced me to people as the help. I even had voice recordings from our country club conversation where she so coldly said she wasn't proud of what I do. Margaret Davis had given me her business card at Rebecca's funeral 6 years ago. She'd said, Jake, if you ever need anything, call me. Rebecca always spoke highly of you. I kept that card tucked away in my wallet for 6 long years without ever needing it. But after that soul-crushing country club lunch, I finally made the call. Margaret, this is Jake Williams, Rebecca's husband. Jake, how are you? How's Emma adjusting to the inheritance? That's actually why I'm calling, I replied, my voice heavy. I think we need to talk. Margaret, with her typical quiet efficiency, reviewed the extensive documentation I'd gathered. The text messages, the photos, the audio recordings, a clear, undeniable pattern of behavior spanning 5 years, but escalating dramatically since Emma inherited the money. Jake, she said, her expression somber. I have to ask, do you really want to pursue this? Because once we start the review process, there's no going back. If the inheritance committee finds that Emma violated the family respect clauses, she loses everything. All $33 million. I thought about Emma at age 5, her little face red with tears because kids at school had made fun of my work clothes on career day. I remembered teaching her that what truly matters isn't what you wear, or how much money you have. It's how you treat people. Somewhere along the way, she'd tragically forgotten that fundamental lesson. Margaret, I said, my voice firm, I don't want her money. I never have. But I will not be treated like I'm worthless because of how I make a living. Then we proceed, Margaret concluded. But Jake, Emma will get one final chance to comply with the inheritance terms. If she publicly acknowledges and respects your role in her life within 72 hours of notification, the committee will consider the matter resolved. One final chance. That seemed fair enough. What happened next would determine whether Emma kept her $33 million or lost everything because she valued superficial status over family. The ultimate test would come at her engagement party. 200 guests from Beverly Hills society. The perfect opulent stage for Emma to either repair our fractured relationship or destroy it completely, irrevocably. I had no idea which choice she'd make, but I knew the consequences either way would be permanent. The engagement party was scheduled for September 14th, exactly 2 weeks away. Margaret meticulously prepared the legal paperwork. I, for my part, pressed my best work shirt and polished my boots until they gleamed. It was time to see what my daughter truly valued more, her inheritance or her integrity. The Beverly Hills Country Club stands on Wilshire Boulevard like a monument to old money. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of hushed quiet that only comes from wealth so established, it doesn't need to make noise. Emma had reserved the main ballroom for her engagement party. 200 guests. A $50,000 budget. Everything, absolutely everything, had to be perfect for her grand debut into Beverly Hills society. I arrived at 6 p.m. wearing my best clothes. Dark jeans, a crisp white button-down shirt, and my impeccably polished work boots. Not fancy, no, but clean and respectful. Emma met me at the entrance, shimmering in a $12,000 Oscar de la Renta dress. Her smile was practiced stiff. Her hug was cold, utterly devoid of warmth. "Dad, you came," she said, more a statement of surprise than welcome. "Of course I came," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "It's your engagement party." She looked me up and down, and I saw her jaw tighten, a familiar sign of her disapproval. "We need to talk before you meet anyone important," she muttered, guiding me to a secluded corner near the bar, away from the stream of arriving guests. "Dad, I need you to understand something tonight." "What's that?" I asked, my heart sinking. "These people are potential business partners," she explained, her voice low and urgent. "Bradley's family has connections throughout Los Angeles. The Ashworths represent $800 million in investment capital." "Congratulations," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "What does that have to do with me?" Emma glanced around, paranoid that someone might overhear. "It has to do with how you present yourself, what you say, how you position your career." "My career?" "My job, Dad," I repeated, trying to maintain an even voice. "Maybe tonight you could say you're in business development or project management. Something that sounds more what?" "Professional," she finished, her tone impatient. "I am a construction foreman," I stated, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts. "I manage projects worth millions of dollars. I supervise crews of 50 people. That is professional." "That's not what these people will hear," she insisted, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "They'll hear blue-collar, manual labor. Not our kind of people." "Our kind of people?" I echoed, the phrase grating on my ears. "You know what I mean," she snapped. Oh, I knew what she meant. And that was the fundamental problem. Before I could respond, a couple approached us. The man was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The woman was elegant, adorned with the kind of jewelry that comes from generations of inherited wealth. "Emma," the woman air-kissed both of Emma's cheeks. "The party looks absolutely divine." "Caroline, Richard. I'm so glad you could make it." Emma's voice changed completely, higher, more affected, almost a caricature of herself. "I'd like you to meet my father." I extended my hand. "Jake Williams. Nice to meet you." Richard Ashworth shook my hand with the grip of someone who'd clearly never done a day of manual labor in his life. "Richard Ashworth. And what line of work are you in, Jake?" This was it. This was Emma's moment. Her chance to either respect who I was, or continue her relentless pattern of public embarrassment. She hesitated for exactly 3 agonizing seconds. Then, "Dad's in development," she announced, her smile brittle. "Project development. Not construction. Development." Richard nodded approvingly. "Excellent. What kind of development?" "Commercial, residential." Emma jumped in before I could answer. "Dad works on large-scale projects. Very complex. Lots of moving parts." Technically true but completely misleading. "Fascinating," Caroline said, her voice dripping with polite interest. "We're always looking for qualified development partners. Perhaps we should schedule lunch sometime." I looked at Emma. She was smiling, pleased with herself for navigating the conversation so successfully. But I couldn't let it stand. "Actually," I interjected, "I should clarify something." Emma's eyes went wide, a flicker of panic in them. "Dad, I'm not in development. I'm a construction foreman. I supervise building projects." The temperature in our little circle dropped 10 degrees. Richard's handshake had been firm. Now his smile became polite but distant. "I see. Well, that's honest work." Caroline nodded with the kind of forced enthusiasm people use when discussing other people's medical procedures. "How nice. Manual labor is so important." They excused themselves within 60 seconds. Emma waited until they were safely out of earshot. Then she grabbed my arm, her grip fierce. "What was that?" "That was honesty," I replied, my own patience wearing thin. "That was sabotage," she hissed. "No, Emma," I countered, my voice low and dangerous. "That was me refusing to lie about who I am." "Do you have any idea what you just did?" she wailed, her eyes beginning to well up. "Richard Ashworth could open doors for Bradley's business. Caroline chairs the Children's Hospital Board. They donate millions every year. And they can't do that," I finished for her, "if they know I pour concrete for a living. They can't do that if they think we're not sophisticated enough for their circles. Emma, we are family. When you embarrass yourself, you embarrass all of us." I felt something shift inside me. A line had been crossed, a point of no return reached. Emma, let me ask you something, I said, my voice quiet but laced with an undeniable edge. When did I become an embarrassment? Dad, please don't make this difficult, she whispered, glancing nervously around the ballroom. No, I mean it. When exactly did the man who raised you become someone you're ashamed of? I'm not ashamed, she protested, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Then what are you? I pressed. She looked around the ballroom at the crystal, the marble, the carefully dressed people sipping champagne. I'm trying to build something here, she confessed, her voice thick with self-pity. A life, a reputation, connections that matter. And you don't fit into that. Not the way you present yourself. The way I present myself, I echoed. Or the way I actually am. Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at it then back at me. Dad, we can talk about this later. I need to greet more guests. No, I stated, my voice gaining strength. We can't talk about this later. We're talking about it now. Dad, please. Not here. Where then? I challenged. At another lunch where you hand me business cards for image consultants? At another family dinner where you apologize for my rough hands? People were starting to notice. Emma's perfect party was developing a very visible crack. You're being dramatic, she accused. I'm being honest, I retorted. Something you seem to have trouble with lately. Emma's voice got sharp, venomous. Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. I've worked hard to get where I am. I'm not going to let anyone, including you, drag me down. Drag you down. I felt a surge of pure fury. Make me look less than what I've become. And there it was. The ugly truth she'd been dancing around for months. I wasn't her father anymore. I was a liability. The party continued around us, a shimmering facade. But something had fundamentally changed. Emma kept glancing at me like I was a bomb that might explode at any moment. I excused myself, needing a breath of fresh air, and stepped out onto the terrace. That's when my phone rang. Mr. Williams, this is Jennifer from the office. Sorry to call during your family event. I lowered my voice. What's going on, Jennifer? The Denver project team needs approval for the overtime schedules, and the board meeting for next Tuesday has been moved to Thursday morning. Should I confirm your attendance? Yes, confirm for Thursday and approve the Denver overtime. We're behind schedule. Perfect. Also, Forbes called about the interview for next month's construction industry feature. Should I schedule it? I glanced back through the ballroom windows. Emma was laughing with a group of women. Her crisis from 5 minutes ago apparently forgotten. Schedule it for the week after next. And Jennifer. Yes, sir. Make sure they spell the company name correctly this time. Wilson Construction Group, not Williams. Absolutely. Have a good evening, Mr. Williams. I hung up and turned around. Emma was standing directly behind me. Who was that? She asked, her eyes narrowed. Work, I replied simply. Work calls you at night. On weekends. Sometimes. Emma frowned. What kind of construction foreman gets calls from Forbes? The kind who has responsibilities you don't understand. Try me, she challenged, her arms crossed. I almost told her then. Almost explained that Wilson Construction Group employed 15,000 people across 12 states. Almost mentioned that we'd built half the infrastructure projects in downtown Los Angeles over the past decade. Instead, I simply said, It's complicated, Emma. Dad, she scoffed. You pour concrete. How complicated can it be? Before I could answer, Bradley Sterling approached with another couple. Bradley was tall, handsome, and had the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never worrying about money. Jake, there you are, he chirped. I want you to meet Harrison and Melissa Parker. Harrison runs Parker Development. They're one of the biggest commercial developers on the West Coast. Harrison was about my age, with silver hair and hands that looked like they'd actually seen some work. A man who'd clearly worked his way up in construction. Jake Williams, I said, extending my hand. Nice to meet you. Pleasure's mine, he replied. Bradley tells me you're in construction? That's right. What kind of projects do you work on? Emma tensed beside me. Here we go again, I thought, a sigh trapped in my chest. Infrastructure mostly, I explained. Bridges, highways, commercial buildings. Large-scale projects. Harrison's eyes lit up. No kidding. Which company? Wilson Construction Group. Harrison's expression changed completely. His polite interest transformed into something akin to awe. Wilson Construction. You work for Jake Wilson? I do. I confirmed, trying to keep my face neutral. Man, that guy is a legend, Harrison exclaimed, his voice practically vibrating with excitement. Built that company from nothing into a $3 billion empire. I've been trying to get a meeting with Wilson's people for 2 years. Their reputation's incredible. Emma was staring at me, her face a mask of confusion, a strange expression I couldn't quite decipher. Actually, Harrison continued, practically buzzing, Wilson Construction just won the contract for the new convention center downtown. $800 million project. Biggest infrastructure contract in LA history. I heard about that, Bradley said, nodding. Wasn't there some controversy about the bidding process? Harrison laughed. Only because Wilson's bid was so much lower than everyone else's. Turns out they've got construction methods that are both faster and cheaper than their competitors. Revolutionary stuff. Jake Wilson's a genius. I stayed quiet, letting Harrison talk, letting the information wash over Emma. I heard Wilson started the company 25 years ago, Melissa Parker added. Self-made billionaire. Forbes ranked him in the top 200 wealthiest Americans last year. Emma was looking at me like she'd never seen me before in her life. Her mouth was slightly agape. Dad, she said slowly, her voice barely a whisper. How long have you worked for Wilson Construction? A long time, I replied, my gaze unwavering. How long exactly? Before I could answer, Margaret Davis, Rebecca's attorney, appeared at my elbow. She was carrying a sleek leather briefcase and wearing the kind of gravitas-filled expression that lawyers get when they have important business to discuss. Jake, she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to talk. Emma looked between Margaret and me, her confusion deepening, twisting into alarm. Dad, who is this? This is Margaret Davis, I explained calmly. Your mother's attorney. I know who she is. Emma snapped, her eyes widening in dawning horror. Why is she here? Margaret smiled politely, a shark smile. I'm here about your inheritance, Emma. There are some matters we need to discuss. The blood drained from Emma's face. Margaret Davis had perfect timing. She always did. Emma, perhaps we could find somewhere private to talk? Margaret suggested, her voice still mild. No. Emma's voice was sharp, laced with growing panic. Whatever you need to say, you can say it here. We were standing on the terrace now, with the ballroom lights glittering behind us. A few other guests had wandered outside, but they were far enough away to give us a semblance of privacy. Very well, Margaret conceded, opening her briefcase. Emma, I'm here because there have been some concerns raised about your compliance with the inheritance terms. What concerns? Emma's voice was thin, reedy. The family respect clauses, Margaret replied, her tone unwavering. Specifically Section 7, Clause 2 and Section 12, Clause 4. Emma looked utterly confused. I don't understand. The clauses requiring you to maintain respectful relationships with surviving family members. I have respectful relationships. Margaret glanced at me, then back at Emma, her gaze piercing. Unfortunately, that's not what the evidence suggests. What evidence? Emma demanded, her voice rising. Documentation spanning the past 5 years, Margaret began, showing a clear pattern of public disrespect toward your father. Emma's face went white. Who provided this documentation? That's confidential. What matters is that the Inheritance Review Committee has serious concerns about your compliance. The what committee? She spluttered. The committee established by your great-grandmother's will to oversee inheritance compliance, Margaret calmly explained. 3 attorneys, 2 family advisors, and 1 independent mediator. Nobody told me about any committee. Emma cried, her voice escalating. It's outlined in Section 15 of the documents you signed, Margaret countered, her voice dry. The committee has the authority to review beneficiary behavior, and, if necessary, revoke inheritance privileges. Emma looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Revoke? Complete forfeiture of funds? Both the trust and the cash disbursement? You can't do that. Actually, Margaret said, her voice chillingly calm, we can, and we will, if the behavior continues. What behavior? I haven't done anything wrong. Margaret pulled out a manila folder. Its contents a death knell for Emma's new life. Would you like me to read some examples? Emma glanced frantically around the terrace. More guests were wandering outside now, drawn by the tension in our voices. Not here, she hissed. Then where? Margaret pressed. Because Emma, this conversation is happening tonight. Whether you want it to or not. That's when Emma made her fatal mistake. Instead of finding a private place to talk, instead of listening to what Margaret had to say, instead of taking even an ounce of responsibility for her actions, Emma decided to double down. You know what? Fine, she declared, her voice ringing with a false bravado. Let's do this right here because I'm tired of everyone acting like I'm the problem. She turned to face the growing crowd of guests who'd gathered on the terrace, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Margaret tried to stop her. Emma, I strongly advise. I'm done being advised. Emma shrieked, her voice now high and shrill. I'm done being told how to live my life by people who don't understand what I've achieved. The entire terrace fell silent. Even the distant party sounds from inside the ballroom seemed to fade. My father thinks I should be grateful for his contributions to my life, she ranted, gesturing wildly at me. My mother's attorney thinks I should follow rules written by dead people who never met me. She was spiraling now, her voice getting louder, more hysterical. But here's what nobody seems to understand. I've built something here. I've created a life worth living. I've surrounded myself with people who understand success, who appreciate excellence, who know the difference between achievement and manual labor. The crowd was getting visibly uncomfortable. This wasn't sophisticated cocktail party conversation anymore. This was a raw public meltdown. My father wants respect. Fine. I'll give him the respect he's earned. She turned to look directly at me, her eyes burning with an ugly mix of shame and rage. Dad, you're a construction worker. You've been a construction worker your entire life. You drive a beat-up truck. You wear work boots to formal events. And you have no idea how to conduct yourself in sophisticated company. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the stares of every single person on that terrace. I appreciate that you raised me after Mom died, she continued, her voice still trembling with emotion. I really do. But that doesn't mean I have to spend the rest of my life apologizing for where I came from. Margaret was shaking her head slowly, a look of profound regret on her face. And if honoring some dusty inheritance clause means I have to pretend that pouring concrete is equivalent to building a real career, then maybe I don't want the inheritance at all. She looked around at the crowd of shocked faces, then back at me. Actually, you know what? I don't need the inheritance. I've got Bradley. I've got my new life. I've got everything I actually want. So, if the committee wants to take their $33 million and give it to someone else, they can go right ahead. She turned back to me one final vicious time. Dad, you're no longer welcome in my life. Not at my home. Not at my events. Not in my social circle. I'm done being embarrassed by you. The crowd stood frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Until Harrison Parker, the very developer who had just been gushing about Wilson Construction, stepped forward. Emma, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle but firm, I think you should know something about your father. Harrison, don't? I started to say, a sense of dread washing over me. Jake, she needs to hear this. Harrison then addressed the stunned crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what family drama we just witnessed, but I do know this. Jake Williams isn't just a construction worker. Emma rolled her eyes, her face still contorted with anger. Harrison, please don't try to make this. Jake Williams is Jake Wilson, Harrison declared, his voice cutting through the tension. He's the founder and CEO of Wilson Construction Group. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop from a mile away. Wilson Construction Group, Harrison continued, his voice ringing with authority, is a $3.2 billion company. Jake employs 15,000 people. His company built half the infrastructure in Los Angeles, including the very building we're standing in right now. Emma's face went from white to an ashen gray. She looked utterly shell-shocked. Jake Wilson is ranked number 191 on the Forbes billionaire list. Harrison finished, delivering the final crushing blow. His personal net worth is estimated at $2.1 billion. He paused, letting that sink in. Then, with a slow, deliberate sweep of his gaze over the now thoroughly stunned crowd, he looked back at Emma. Oh, and Emma, that $33 million inheritance you just rejected? Your father could buy and sell it 30 times over before lunch tomorrow. Harrison's gaze returned to Emma, unwavering. So, when you say he's just a construction worker who doesn't understand sophisticated company, well, I think you might want to reconsider that assessment. Emma was staring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief, horror, and a dawning terrible understanding. Dad, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked at my daughter, this person I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, now standing in her $12,000 dress, surrounded by the Beverly Hills elite she'd worked so hard to impress, her world shattering around her. Yes, Emma, I said, my voice quiet. Is that true? I nodded slowly. Every word. Why didn't you tell me? She demanded, a desperate plea in her voice. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, I replied, my voice steady. Not what I have. Emma's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was utterly speechless. Margaret Davis cleared her throat, her voice calm and professional amidst the wreckage. Emma, in light of your public statements tonight, I'm afraid the Inheritance Committee has no choice but to proceed with immediate forfeiture proceedings. Wait, Emma cried, a fresh wave of panic washing over her. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises purchased with inheritance funds and return all assets to the estate. But I didn't know. Ignorance of your father's wealth doesn't excuse your behavior toward him, Margaret stated, her words like steel. The inheritance terms were clear. Maintain respectful relationships with surviving family members. You've done the opposite, and you did it publicly in front of witnesses. Margaret closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. The committee will convene Monday morning. The forfeiture will be finalized by Wednesday. She handed Emma a business card. If you'd like to contest the decision, you can call my office. Though, given tonight's performance, I wouldn't recommend it. Margaret turned to me. Jake, the committee will need you to sign the transfer documents. Can you come by the office Thursday morning? I'll be there, I confirmed. Emma stood frozen, a statue of despair as Margaret walked away. The crowd began to disperse, heading back inside to salvage what was left of the party. Finally, Emma found her voice a small choke sound. Dad, wait. We need to talk. I looked at her one last time, my heart a tangled mess of love and profound disappointment. No, Emma, I said, my voice firm. We really don't. I turned and walked toward the parking garage, leaving my daughter standing alone on the terrace, in her $12,000 dress, having just lost $33 million because she was too proud to respect the man who raised her. Actions, I knew, have consequences even for inheritance money. The parking garage was quiet, except for the echo of my footsteps. I'd made it halfway to my truck when I heard Emma's heels clicking rapidly behind me. Dad, please wait. I stopped but didn't turn around. Dad, I need to understand what just happened up there. Now I turned. Emma looked smaller somehow, despite the expensive dress and jewelry. The brash confidence she'd worn like armor all evening had finally cracked. What do you need to understand, Emma? Are you really Jake Wilson, the billionaire? I'm Jake Williams, I said calmly. I've always been Jake Williams. Wilson is just the name I use for business. Why? When you're worth what I'm worth, people treat you differently. They look at you differently. They make assumptions. But Dad, you drive an old truck. You live in that tiny house in Pasadena. You wear work boots to formal events. Because that's who I am, I explained, my voice gentle but firm. The money doesn't change that. Emma shook her head like she was trying to wake up from a dream. I don't understand. If you're worth billions, why do you live like what? I finished for her. Like a normal person? Like someone who doesn't have money, Emma? I've had money for 20 years. I've been the same person the entire time. The only thing that's changed is your perception. But the house. She stammered. I own the entire block, I clarified. I live in that house because it's where I raised you. Where your mother and I were happy. The truck. I own 17 vehicles. I drive the truck because I like it. It's practical. Emma leaned against a concrete pillar, looking like she might faint. That I've been. God. The things I've said to you. Yes, I acknowledged, you have. I didn't know. That's the problem, Emma. You thought you knew everything about me, but you never bothered to ask questions. You made assumptions based on appearances. But why didn't you tell me? She pleaded. Why let me think you were struggling financially? I walked closer, keeping my voice gentle but firm. When did I ever say I was struggling? You didn't have to say it. The house, the truck, the clothes. Emma, I interrupted. I've never complained about money. I've never asked you for money. I've never acted like money was a problem. But you live so modestly. And what's wrong with that? I challenged. Let me ask you something. If you'd known about the money 5 years ago, would you have treated me differently? Emma opened her mouth and closed it, no words coming out. Would you have been proud of me for what I'd built? I continued, pressing the point. Or, would you have been proud of me for what I could buy you? Dad, would you have introduced me as your father who worked hard and raised you well? Or as your father who could write checks for Bradley's business? Emma's eyes filled with tears, smearing her carefully applied makeup. I don't know. I do, I said softly, the pain of her honesty still sharp. You would have treated me exactly the same way you treated the inheritance. Like a thing to be displayed when convenient and hidden when embarrassing. That's not fair, Dad. Isn't it? I asked, looking her straight in the eye. Tonight, when Harrison told everyone about Wilson Construction, what was your first emotion? Pride in my accomplishments, or excitement about what it meant for your social status? Emma wiped her eyes, smearing her makeup further. I was shocked. And after the shock wore off, she didn't answer, which was answer enough. Emma, I said, my voice softening slightly, for 25 years I've built something I'm proud of. Not just the money, the company, the jobs, the infrastructure. I've employed thousands of people. I've built schools and hospitals and bridges. I've donated $500 million to charities. $500 million, she breathed, utterly stunned. The Children's Hospital where you were born, the new wing that opened last year, I continued. I funded that anonymously. Emma stared at me. Why anonymously? Because charity isn't about recognition, I explained. It's about helping people. We stood in silence for a moment, the muffled sounds of the party continuing above us. Dad, she finally asked, her voice small. What happens now? Now, I said, my voice firm. You face the consequences of your choices. The inheritance, it's gone, Emma. Margaret wasn't bluffing. The committee will meet Monday, and by Wednesday you'll have lost every penny. Can't you stop them? She pleaded. I won't stop them. Why not? Because actions have consequences. You spent 5 years treating me like garbage, culminating in tonight's performance. The inheritance terms were clear, and you violated them spectacularly. But I didn't know about your money. Emma, stop, I said, cutting her off. The inheritance terms didn't say you had to respect me because I was wealthy. They said you had to respect me because I'm your father. Emma slumped against the pillar, defeated. What am I going to do? What you should have done years ago, I told her. Figure out who you are without money defining you. The penthouse was purchased with inheritance money. You have 72 hours. Your engagement to Bradley might survive if it's based on love, instead of financial convenience. Dad, please. Can't we work something out? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The expensive dress, the jewelry, the sheer desperation in her eyes as she realized her new life was built on sand. Emma, I've spent 25 years working to build something meaningful. You've spent the last 5 years tearing down the most important relationship in your life because you were embarrassed by honest work. I can change, she insisted. Can you? Or will you just pretend to change until you get what you want? I can really change. Prove it. How? Start by answering one question honestly. If I were still just a construction foreman, no billions, no empire, no Forbes ranking, would you want me in your life? Emma hesitated. That hesitation, that agonizing silence told me everything I needed to know. I thought so. I started walking toward my truck again. Dad, wait. Let me try again. Ask me again. I stopped. Emma, it doesn't matter what you say now. What matters is what you've already shown me for 5 years. People can change. Yes, they can, I agreed. But change has to come from inside, not from desperation. I reached my truck and turned around one final time. Emma was still standing by the pillar, looking utterly lost. Emma, I love you. I always will. But love isn't the same as acceptance. I won't accept being treated as less than human because of my job. It wasn't about your job, she cried. It was entirely about my job, I corrected her gently. And my clothes and my truck and my house. Everything that made me embarrassing in your new social circle. I opened the truck door. When you figure out how to love people for who they are instead of what they have, call me. Until then, we have nothing to discuss. Dad, goodbye, she sobbed as I got into my truck. I drove away, leaving my daughter standing alone in the parking garage, finally understanding the profound difference between wealth and worth. For Emma, the party was truly over. By Wednesday, she'd learn exactly how much her inheritance was worth compared to the relationship she'd thrown away. Monday morning arrived, gray and cold. I sat in Margaret Davis's conference room, looking out at downtown Los Angeles through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city I'd helped build spread out below us, highways, bridges, office towers. Most people driving to work that morning had no idea that Wilson Construction Group had built the very infrastructure they relied on every day. Margaret entered, carrying a stack of documents and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent the weekend dealing with frantic phone calls. Jake, before we begin, I should mention that Emma called me 17 times yesterday. What did she want? To negotiate, to apologize, to explain, to beg. Margaret sat down across from me. I told her the decision was out of my hands now. Is it completely? The Inheritance Committee convened at 9 a.m. 3 attorneys, 2 family advisors, 1 independent mediator. They reviewed all the documentation. Margaret opened the top file. Text messages where Emma called you just a construction worker to her friends. Photos from events where she introduced you as hired help. Audio recordings from your country club conversation. And of course, Saturday night's public performance. What did they conclude? Unanimous violation of inheritance terms. Complete forfeiture of all funds and assets. She slid a document across the table. This is the official notice. Emma has 72 hours from this morning to return all assets purchased with inheritance money. The penthouse, the car, the jewelry, the country club membership. Everything. I scanned the legal language. It was thorough and final. What about the $5 million in cash she already spent? She'll need to repay it. If she can't, we'll pursue legal collection. And if she still can't? Bankruptcy, wage garnishment. Standard debt collection procedures. Margaret pulled out another document. This is the asset transfer form. Once you sign it, the $33 million reverts to you as the surviving family member. I looked at the paper but didn't pick up the pen. Jake, is there a problem? What happens to the money if I don't sign? It goes into a charitable trust managed by the estate. Elizabeth Morrison specified that if inheritance conditions weren't met, and the family declined to reclaim the funds, everything should go to children's charities. I thought about Emma at 5 years old, excited about career day until kids made fun of my work clothes. I thought about teaching her to tie her shoes, helping with homework, walking her down the aisle at her wedding. And I thought about Saturday night, watching her choose social status over basic human decency. I won't be taking the money, I said, my decision firm. Margaret looked genuinely surprised. Are you? Sure. It's $33 million. I'm sure. Let it go to the children's charities. That's what Elizabeth would have wanted. Margaret made a note in the file. Very well. The charitable trust will be established by Friday. She pulled out a final document. This is a restraining order application. Given Emma's persistent phone calls, I thought you might want legal protection from harassment. No restraining order. Jake, she's called my office 43 times since Saturday night. She's still my daughter, I replied. If she wants to contact me, she can. Whether I respond is my choice. Margaret gathered the documents. The committee asked me to commend you for your handling of the situation. It would have been easy to use your wealth to intimidate Emma into compliance. Instead, you let the inheritance terms speak for themselves. The terms were fair. Emma chose to ignore them. What will you tell people about this? Margaret asked as we stood. The business community is already buzzing about Saturday night. I'll tell them the truth, I said. My daughter lost her inheritance because she forgot that respect is earned, not bought. Margaret walked me to the elevator. Jake, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you think Emma will learn from this? I thought about the question as we walked. I hope so. But learning requires accepting responsibility. Emma spent Saturday night blaming everyone except herself. The elevator doors opened. If she does learn, will you forgive her? I've already forgiven her, I stated. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the last 5 years didn't happen. What would it take for you to rebuild the relationship? An apology that isn't motivated by money. Recognition that her behavior was wrong, not just inconvenient. And evidence that she understands the difference between wealth and character. The elevator reached the ground floor. Margaret walked me to the lobby. Jake, one last question. Any regrets about not telling Emma about your wealth earlier? I stepped into the Los Angeles morning, thinking about all the ways this story could have played out differently. None, I finally answered. If I told her about the money, I never would have learned who she really was. And now you know. Now I know she has a choice to make. She can either figure out how to be proud of herself without putting other people down, or she can spend the rest of her life blaming other people for her problems. Which do you think she'll choose? I got into my truck, rolled down the window, and looked back at the building where my daughter's inheritance had just become 43 charitable scholarships for underprivileged kids. I guess we'll find out. By Wednesday afternoon, the consequences were real and immediate. Emma's Bentley was repossessed at 11 a.m., while she was having lunch with Caroline Ashworth. The repo company waited politely outside the Beverly Hills restaurant until she finished her salad, then handed her the paperwork in front of a dozen of Beverly Hills' most influential women. Caroline Ashworth called me that evening. Jake, or should I say Mr. Wilson, I owe you an apology. No, you don't. Yes, I do. Richard and I judged you based on appearances. We were wrong. You judged me based on information Emma provided. I corrected her. That's not your fault. Still, we should have been more thoughtful. I could hear the calculation in her voice. Caroline Ashworth was smart enough to realize that insulting a billionaire's work clothes might not have been her wisest social move. Caroline, you don't need to apologize. You reacted honestly to what you saw. Well, if you're ever interested in supporting children's charities, Richard and I would love to discuss opportunities with Wilson Construction. I'll keep that in mind, I said. What Caroline didn't know was that Wilson Construction had been anonymously funding 3 of her charity boards for the past decade. I saw no reason to mention it. Thursday morning brought more consequences. Emma's country club membership was terminated for non-payment. The Beverly Hills penthouse went into foreclosure proceedings. Her credit cards were canceled when the banks discovered her inheritance had been revoked. Bradley Sterling called me Friday afternoon. Mr. Williams. Mr. Wilson, I think we need to talk about. What about, Bradley? About Emma. About what happened Saturday night. What about it? About. I need to understand. Is Emma really going to lose everything? She's already lost everything, Bradley. The question is what she plans to do about it. She's been staying with friends since Tuesday. She can't afford her own place anymore. I'm aware. Mr. Wilson, I know Emma said some terrible things to you, but she's panicking. She doesn't know how to live without money. Then she'll learn. Is there anything? Could you help her? Just enough to get back on her feet. Why would I do that? Because she's your daughter. I thought about that for a moment. Bradley, let me ask you something. If she was just a normal person working a normal job, would you still want to marry her? The silence stretched longer than it should have. I love Emma. That's not what I asked. More silence. I see. Bradley, I think you and Emma both need to figure out what you actually value in relationships. Mr. Wilson. Good luck, Bradley. I hung up. By Monday, the engagement was officially off. The most interesting call came from Harrison Parker. Jake, I wanted to apologize for outing you Saturday night. That wasn't my place. You did what you thought was right. Still, I know you kept your identity private for good reasons. I did, but Emma forced the situation. How are you handling the publicity? I saw the article in the Business Journal this morning. I hadn't seen the article yet. What did it say? Construction billionaire's daughter loses inheritance after public family feud. They got most of the facts right, surprisingly. Any comment from Emma? She declined to be interviewed. Smart move considering. Harrison paused. Jake, I've been thinking about what happened. Your daughter spent years being embarrassed by honest work, then lost millions because she couldn't show basic respect. There's a lesson there. What lesson is that? Character matters more than circumstances. Always has, always will. The biggest consequence came the following week. Emma showed up at my house. I found her sitting on my front porch Tuesday evening when I got home from work. She looked different, smaller somehow. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of designer clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Hi, Dad. Emma, can we talk? I sat down on the porch steps beside her. What do you want to say? I want to apologize, she began, her voice hoarse. For what specifically? For treating you like you were worthless? For being ashamed of honest work? For caring more about what other people thought than about the man who raised me? I listened without interrupting, letting her speak her truth. I want to apologize for Saturday night, for the things I said in front of all those people, for choosing my pride over our relationship. She was crying now, quietly, her shoulders shaking. I want to apologize for 5 years of being a terrible daughter. Emma, I said, but she held up a hand. I'm not done. I want to apologize for not knowing you at all. For never asking about your work, your dreams, your accomplishments. For assuming that because you didn't show off, you didn't have anything to show. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smudging her face. And I want to apologize for only caring about your feelings after I found out about your money. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the evening breeze rustling the leaves on the trees. What are you going to do now? I finally asked. I don't know, she admitted, her voice still shaky. I've never had to figure out how to live without money. What do you want to do? I want to learn how to be someone I can respect. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time in years. That's a good start. 6 months later, Emma called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Dad, I got a job. What kind of job? Administrative assistant at a nonprofit. It's entry level, but they help underprivileged kids get college scholarships. How do you feel about it? Scared, hopeful, grateful someone was willing to hire me despite everything. Emma had spent the winter learning how to live on a budget. She shared a small apartment with a roommate in Burbank. She took the bus to work. She cooked her own meals and shopped at thrift stores. Dad, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think I'll ever stop feeling ashamed of how I treated you? I hope not. Really, Emma? Shame can be useful if it motivates you to be better, I explained. The question is whether you'll use it as fuel for growth, or as an excuse for self-pity. I'm trying to use it for growth, she said, her voice stronger now. I can see that. She'd been volunteering at a homeless shelter on weekends. She'd written letters to the people she'd hurt, taking responsibility without asking for forgiveness. She'd started seeing a therapist to understand why she'd needed other people's money to feel valuable. Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but do you think we could have dinner sometime? Just us. I thought about the little girl who used to help me fix things around the house. The teenager who called me every day during her first semester of college. The young woman who'd cried on my shoulder when her first serious relationship ended. I thought about the person she'd become when money made her forget where she came from. And I thought about the person she might become if she learned from her mistakes instead of repeating them. I'd like that, I said, a genuine smile forming on my face. Really? Really? But Emma, I need you to understand something. What? I'm not the same person I was before Saturday night. And you're not the same person either. We're going to have to figure out what our relationship looks like now. I understand. Do you? I pressed gently. You're not going to pretend the last 5 years didn't happen just because I'm sorry. That's right, she acknowledged. And I'm not going to pretend I deserve forgiveness just because I apologized. Also right. We made plans for dinner the following Friday. Nothing fancy, just a chance to see if we could build something new from the pieces of what we'd broken. As I hung up the phone, I realized something important. For the first time in years, I was proud of my daughter. Not for what she had, but for who she was becoming.